the title company explained it thoroughly and they argued with them. Like some people you just can't get to understand it. I'm like, dude, it's just the way it is. Like you can't.
So I came from another market and I had bought like 20 something houses before and had full understanding of what it was. So there's probably that part of my little brain that just is like, nope, we're not changing that. Like that is not going away.
Yeah.
We used to have a really cool, excuse me, letter at a previous brokerage that you would sign it. You'd have your buyers sign it so they would understand how Sarpy and Douglas County taxes are. And I have it, and I'm actually, just redoing it onto letterhead for BHG, and I'm going to send it to Tim and see if, he wants to use it for the whole brokerage. But it might be helpful, especially for newer agents who don't know how, or people like me who don't deal with taxes because your husband is awesome and he does it for you, to be able to explain it better.
Yeah, we probably should have some little like a cartoony kind of thing that's animated.
I'll get right on that.
That would help me. Yeah, get him on it. Maybe Max could do that. He's got that animated software stuff. So yeah, right. Like he's gonna do that for me.
Right.
Yeah.
Is he home or is he in Colorado?
He's home.
Okay.
He's been home since end of March last year.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. He's studying for his getting ready to take his real estate test. So
okay.
All right. We got everybody that's coming. Tim's coming back. What time is it? 12:05. Okay.
5.
All right. Why don't we just get going? So everybody watch the videos that Dawn so generously put together for us. They were fantastic, Dawn, by the way. I can't even believe that you got like the inspector to let you film that. That was great. And then all of your verbiage on it was great. And thank you to everybody that sent a question. And if you have other questions, just hold on to them, throw them in chat, raise your hand, whatever. But this class could be a class that took like 3 days, full days, because inspection stuff is never, ever going to be something that you are an expert at. Well, there is somebody here that's an expert at it. Where is he? There he is, Carl. So, Dawn, do you know Carl used to be an inspector? Carl, what was your company? I can't hear you. You're muted. Sorry.
I was with Metrospec, and before that, I was with Raquel's brother, Chad Albers, for 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
I did for like 10 years.
Yeah. So, Dawn, you can take it and go from here. And I think you have a list of the questions.
Yeah, I only got a handful of the questions, but one of them, Kathy, I think it was your question. I have questions on what your question is. So you put, I'd love to know what type of issues we as agents should be able to pick out, identify as potential issues that give us the competency to encourage an inspection when they're debating about whether to have one or not. So do you mean like when you're showing a house, to be able to
so when you're showing your house, like I look for this and that and the other things, so that way I can say, how people are kind of debating whether to do inspections now or not in order to have the stronger offer. That way I can say, for this reason, I think it's very extra important that you do proceed with an inspection.
An amazing question. I was wondering the same thing. I just didn't quite know how to word it.
I didn't either, apparently.
I want to make sure I was understanding what your question was. So first I'm going to start off with, you need to be really, really, really careful about how much you are pushing your client to or not to have an inspection, and what you're saying in a house, both when you're showing a house and when you are at an inspection walkthrough. Now, depending on your experience level, both with real estate sales and, if you have done a lot of flipping or construction work or have a background in that, the person, Carl, who is a home inspector, I mean, you would be able to point things out maybe in a more accurate way than just some random person walking through a house that doesn't have that background knowledge. So you got to be really, really careful, because whatever you say, like, you're opening yourself up for liability. And if you're comfortable with what you're saying and you know you're right, then by all means say it. But if you're like, I don't know, they're going to make decisions based on whether to move forward with a house or what they're going to ask for based on what you tell them. And then if you tell them something wrong, then that's on you. So you always want to keep that liability mindset when you're going through a house, but then you also, obviously, your job is to represent the client at the highest level that you can. So you want to point things out that you see. So I make it a habit to, when I walk through a house, I'm not going to like nitpick every single, like, oh, there's a nail pop over there, did you see that? Unless I'm doing a video for somebody transferring here who can't come into the house, because I've had 2 people recently, one from England and one from Wisconsin. I mean, I've had a lot of people who bought sight unseen, but those were just people who closed last week 2 in a row. That's sight unseen, didn't even see the house till they signed paperwork. So then on my video, I'm literally like, do you see this little mark on the cabinet right here? There's one little tile that has a crack in it. But when I'm walking through with a person, like, I kind of leave that up to them to pick out, like, those little cosmetic things. But I always look for things like stains on a ceiling. That's an easy thing to point out that shows evidence of previous moisture leaks. If you see things that are worrisome with cracking in the foundation, and we can get into specifics on which cracks are concerning and which cracks are not. I mean, there's a wide range there. It's normal to have cracks in a concrete slab. You're always going to have cracks, and even more so in the block foundations. But it's not your job, because you're not a basement foundation person, to say, like, this is a big deal or this isn't a big deal, but it's just something that you make them aware of. Like, hey, just, like, there's some spots over here that might be something that, you might want to have an inspection, or you might want to have somebody look at. You're not a furnace person. It's hard to, I mean, you can identify if the furnace is old. you can find the tag or the manufacturer date on most furnaces. I've had a couple that I could not find it to save my life, but most of the time, furnace, air conditioner, water heater, you can find those things and at least point out if they're old or not. But there's not a lot that you can do. I mean, you're not going to get up on the roof. You're not going to get up in the attic. You're not going to plug things into all the outlets. You're not going to open and close all the way. Other things that a home inspector looks for are not things that are easily noticeable just walking through a house. So the big things you can point out, and for sure you should. Did that answer your question at all?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I suppose just from not having enough experience with those things, I don't know if there's like a resource other than just being on other inspections of what those things are that we could easily. I'm more from a place of encouraging them to do an inspection.
Mhm.
So like being able to identify, oh yes, this is that type of crack in a foundation that I don't want to appear like I don't know what I'm like. I don't recognize things that would obviously be a big issue because I have no true experience in
I don't
that
think you need to
realm.
have that fear. Like, that is not your job. Your job is not to point out issues. Your job is to tell them their options and educate them on the pros and cons of those options. It's their job to make those decisions. That's not a decision that you make for them, nor should you. Kristen,
Sure.
what do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, especially I work with a lot of first-time home buyers, and as we go through it, I've had a little more experience, so I can point some things out. I listen intently at all of my inspections so that I can learn. But I always say, this is common. I've seen this in a lot in a house of this age. If it concerns you, have it inspected. And I always say that no matter what, if you don't have the experience and if you are concerned, you need to get an inspection. Whether or not you ask for repairs, that's entirely up to you. But if there's any concern whatsoever, it's one of those, buyer beware. Make sure you know what you're buying. So if it's important to you, have an inspection. I'm not an inspector. I can point things out, but don't take my word for it, because that's not my area of expertise. And I always say that as a caveat, because you can get into trouble if you start giving advice. So Carl, you need to be careful if you're working as a realtor, not put your inspector cap on at the same time. But yeah, you're not supposed to know all of that. You're not expected to, because that's not part of our realm of license.
Yeah, and
Thank you.
it's funny too, because I just recently sold a house to somebody who was a home inspector previously. And so my mindset was, and they had an inspection and they had a buddy of theirs do the inspection. And my mindset was, he's an inspector. He saw this for years and years. And like, he's just gonna be like, oh, no big deal. And I walked into the walkthrough and he'd gotten there before me and he was freaking out about like some electrical things and some roof things. And I'm like, whoa, like calm down. Like, so even if you have that background when you're buying a house, it's a whole different experience. It's very emotional when it's like your house. And even from a home inspector's side, like Carl could go through and, you know, see things from an inspector's point of view, but how you negotiate that on the other side is completely foreign to them because they never were on that side of it. They didn't negotiate repairs. They don't know what to do with it once you find things. And so that's
So Dawn, do you and maybe you can speak a little bit to the comparison between how you prepped your clients before for inspections and how you prep them now in a market like now, where we talk to them about like what are like major defects kind of things that we look at. One of the things that like I haven't shown houses this last year. Laura's been doing all that, but one of the things I would always do is have my phone and I take a picture of the front of the HVAC because that would always be a question later, and it would seldom be on the seller's property disclosure, like the date of the HVAC. And so one less thing that I had to ask the listing agent about that kind of alarms them. So I would always just take a picture of that and the water heater, you know, those kind of things that would be questions later. So what kinds of things do you do now, or how do you prep clients now in this market where the likelihood of inspections are not as much as they used to be?
Yeah, and you know, that is really important to start doing from the very beginning. So I know that in other classes they've talked to you, I'm sure, about always doing initial buyer consultations and making sure that you're setting expectations before you even start the process, before you ever get them into a house. And so I always do that. And, you know, whether that's in person 6 feet apart with masks, or whether that's a Zoom meeting, or at the very, very minimum, at least a good thorough phone call. But I like to have face-to-face if I can. And I set those expectations from the very beginning. I start off talking about what's happening in the market as a whole. If they've purchased a house before, I talk about what's different today versus when maybe they purchased before. And I talk a lot about how it used to be when we would negotiate for our buyers, we were negotiating for what can we get from the seller? How can we make this the most appealing to you? And now, fair or not, we're negotiating from the other end where we're like, what can we give to the sellers? What can we make our offer more appealing to the sellers if you want to buy that house? And so I always start off with talking about these are the inspections that you can have. 100%, I would never tell you not to have an inspection, but here's the pros and cons of each of these inspections. Here's what you need to be concerned with. So on a whole house inspection, I talk about how it is important to have when you don't want to get into a house and find out you have roof issues and foundation issues and things that are going to cost you thousands and thousands of dollars, especially for a first-time home buyer. But I also talk about from a seller's perspective that other people will write offers with no inspection. And you know, that is an option. It's not something I recommend, but it's definitely something that's happening in our market. And then I talk about the option of doing the inspection for informational purposes only, where at least they have the peace of mind that they had that inspection, and yet the seller is less adverse because it's less risky to them because they know you're not going to come back and nitpick. I do explain that if we do leave the inspection open where we're going to negotiate repairs, that we are looking for major defects. We are not looking for cosmetic things. We're not looking for, you know, a little reverse polarity in an outlet. We're looking for health and safety issues or things that are going to be a major expense. And those are the only things that they should expect any kind of negotiation on. Most of my buyers, when you explain what's happening in the market, most of them will choose to do an inspection for informational purposes only. But I always tell them 100%, it is your call. I am never going to make that decision for you. It probably is going to be very house specific too. And we will talk about that again when we find a house that you want to write an offer on, whether or not you're comfortable doing that. And I said, anytime you're willing to lose a house over an inspection, we write it that way. Like, you write it how bad do you want that house? Like, I can't make that call for you. I do talk about some of the other things that we used to do very commonly and the pros and cons to that. I talk to them about, radon. Are you familiar with what radon is? I talked to them about how much it costs to mitigate for radon. And I explained that, for radon, for me, and it's for me, not for them, is not as big of a deal just because we know how much it costs to mitigate for that. That is something you can always treat for later. You can test for it after closing. And if it comes back high, it's going to be a $750 to $850 fix. So if you are comfortable taking on maybe having to put a $750 to $850 radon mitigation system in after closing, awesome. Let's not ask for that up front. You can always do that later. Home inspection, we won't know what those repairs could possibly be until we get that report. So if it's something that we know what it would be versus something that we wouldn't know, it's a little bit less scary for them. So it's easier to give that up. Does that make sense? I talk about like mold and, that they have the right to test for mold. I very rarely, I think in 20 years, I've had a handful of people actually do the air quality tests. But I do tell them that, the whole house inspection, if they have that, they're going to visually inspect for mold, but it's not going to be the same as an air quality test. So if that's something that's super important to them because of allergies or something, that's something they can ask for. One of the other questions I did get is it possible for a buyer to request just a component of a house to be inspected? For instance, an old HVAC system or the roof. And yes, 100%. So that's another conversation you can have with your clients of, okay, if we don't want a whole house inspection, would you be comfortable if we just did a HVAC inspection? Would you be comfortable if we just did a roof inspection? What are their concerns? Because the more we can minimize the risk for the seller, the stronger our offer looks. But it always is going to come down to your buyer's comfort level.
Quickly, I want to say, Dawn, to your point, it really is the buyer's comfort level. I've bought 4 houses, well, more than that, and I've never had an inspection, never. Now, granted, I'm an experienced realtor now, but that was even when I wasn't an experienced realtor. And it's just because I was comfortable with that. I was my own realtor. I told myself I was fine. You don't know what the buyers think. The buyer might be fine. It might be fine.
Right. Yeah, if the buyer's not super risk adverse, they may just not care. They don't care about a home inspection. And again, it depends on the house. I would go into some houses and I'm never going to make that call for them, but I've been in some houses that, are newer and I'd be like, well, nothing's really probably going to come up on the inspection. And then you go in others and you're like, wow, this is going to be like a 10-page inspection summary. So, as you get more experience, you might be able to help them a little bit with that, but ultimately it's their comfort level. I buy houses all the time with no inspection, and most of the time it's fine. Sometimes it bites you in the butt, but usually those houses, you're going to be putting a bunch of money in before you buy them. I just put 80 grand in a house that I knew it was going to be a lot. I didn't know it was going to be that much. but I'm okay with that. Like I know that going in, but a lot of buyers, they don't have the money and they wouldn't be comfortable with that. So it's just all based on their comfort level. But whatever we can do to mitigate the risk for the seller in this market, which is, for those of us who've been doing it for a long time, this is so weird and strange to us. For those of you who are new right now, like you've never known any different. So yay. But for us, it's so bizarre. Somebody had asked me I had talked about this as an abnormal seller's market, and do we have any idea when it would be normal again? And no, we don't. Right now, with the inventory levels at what they're at right now, we could have 3,000 houses hit the market before it would normalize. And so the chances of that happening anytime soon are extremely slim. It would take some kind of catastrophic event, like some huge corporation moving out. But like UP just laid off 5,000 people. That didn't make a dent. ConAgra left our market a few years ago, even before we had such a shortage of inventory. That didn't make a dent. So no, they can't build under 300 anymore. And so it's gonna be a long time. It may not be this crazy. I don't know that we're gonna sustain exactly where we're at right now, but we're not gonna go back to a seller's or a buyer's market anytime soon, that's for sure. So what other questions do you have? Because I think that's pretty much all that anybody sent me ahead of time.
You know, we talked about this, Carol and I, yesterday, and one of the reasons a lot of these agents in this room didn't have a lot of questions is because they're brand new, and a lot of you don't know what you don't know yet. So I feel like we can still fill the room talking about inspections. By the way, one of our agents, Ryan Martinez, he's not here today because he is with his mentor doing an actual walkthrough on an inspection, and they're going to do the negotiations and everything. So so he's getting real world experience at this moment. And I did tell him to take really good notes because he's also going to watch all this. And I told him to come back and tell us what was different, what were the surprises, you know, that kind of stuff. So we'll have a lot with
Yeah,
him
that's
next
good.
week.
That's really
Yeah.
good.
I have
Let's
another
talk
one
about
for you. Oh,
negotiating.
go ahead.
I was gonna say, let's talk about negotiating inspection repairs, unless you guys have another question, Kathy, if you've got something else to cover first.
It doesn't. You can go ahead, and I can ask it later.
Well, I don't want you to forget. You can ask it now.
Okay.
Right, Kathy.
From the pre-inspection standpoint, maybe some things that you might identify as things that you would have your clients go ahead and repair, or what you would just say, nope, we're just disclosing it. I know every case is probably different, but if you have kind of some standard level of things that you're like, no, you should get that repaired.
Okay, well, I'm going to start off with saying that I am in the other camp. So Carol will tell you should have every property pre-inspected. I am in the other camp, and that's what makes this business awesome, because we're all different and we all run our business differently. But right now, with so many people not even asking for inspections or doing for informational purposes only, I would not personally have my seller get a house pre-inspected, because then you are in the situation of, now, what am I going to fix? What am I going to disclose? Yes, I understand that it's nice to have that when you're on the buyer side and it's multiple offer situation and you're trying to decide, am I going to ask for an inspection or not? I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, because a lot of agents do it very successfully and they love it. But I, in my experience lately, have had, in almost every single multiple offer situation, have had people choose to either not do an inspection or do it for informational purposes only, and they just released it. So I would have set myself up for having my seller have things they had to fix or disclose that now we don't have to. That being said, in a different market, if I were doing a pre-inspection, the things that I tell sellers that they need to fix are things that are going to come up for any buyer and be an issue. So obviously, if there's roof damage, hail damage, something that makes that roof uninsurable, 100% you're going to have to fix that, because if you don't fix it for this buyer, you're going to have to fix it for the next one. Anything that's a health or safety issue, if your furnace is leaking carbon monoxide because it has a cracked heat exchanger, well, 100% you're going to have to fix that. Anything that's an electrical or a plumbing leak kind of thing, those are things that you're going to have to fix up front if you know about them. And then obviously anything that's a disclosure issue, if rotten siding comes up, leaky windows, things like that, but now we have to disclose that. In this market, you don't have to fix as much as you would have previously. I mean, I've seen a couple people who have had pre-inspections and they put them out there for the buyers to review, but they've still said that the house is as is and they're not going to fix anything. And that is definitely a choice that the seller can make. And that's just another conversation you need to have with your seller. And I do still have that conversation with my seller. So let me back up and say, it's not like I tell my seller absolutely don't do it. I just explain to them, okay, some agents will tell you you should have a pre-inspection, and these are the reasons why, and this is the reason why I don't encourage that. What would you like to do? I mean, you always want to put it back to your client. You never go into like a always and never, don't do this, because every situation is different. And for some sellers, maybe that feels better to them because they're mitigating some risk up front that they're not going to have an issue later. So again, it's very, very, very client specific. But right now they don't have to fix much. I mean, they just don't. I mean,
I want to speak to that because yes, I do completely 100% believe in pre-inspections, but no, I'm not believing in pre-inspections on absolutely everything in this market. So and I present it to the clients either way. If they want to have it for whatever reasons they want to have it, or we're pushing, price, or there's some other thing, or there's something we already know about, and whether they fix it or not, then that's fine. But No, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and particularly if it's a decent house that's not that old and has, definitely does not have any big red flags or even yellow flags. So, yeah, so
I love the I love that Dawn spoke up and said that she doesn't do a pre-inspections. I did not know you didn't do that, and I love how you said it because you're totally right. Everybody does their
Yeah.
job differently. We all do it
Yeah.
differently.
yeah,
Even before this market, I mean, even when we didn't have such a hot seller's market, I've never been a proponent of a pre-inspection. I mean, there are certain circumstances, certain houses, certain clients that it makes sense. And I've always presented the option, but I have never been I'm going to inspect every house because it just, once somebody's already under contract and has already emotionally and mentally moved into that house from a buyer's perspective, you have a better position to negotiate from, even in a buyer's market, in my opinion, if they've already like sold themselves on your house and like now you're negotiating repairs later versus upfront they know there's this much wrong with your house, then they'll just go buy the neighbor's house. And so it's just everybody's got a different opinion on that. And
well, it comes from a kind of a different place too. Some people are like, part of their value proposition is that we have a pre-inspection done, or we pay for that. I don't negotiate on commission. So there's other things that if I feel there's a negotiation, it's either, maybe a home warranty, a home, just there's different things that I will do based on what I'm willing to do in support of the particular listing. And as an agent, you can decide to do whatever you want to do there. That's what's so great about everybody, like Tim said, everybody doing it differently, and Dawn said. So for me, it's more of a here's what our part of our value proposition, having somebody come through and do a staging consultation, some of those things. So it's whatever balance that you want to make too, don't you think, Dawn,
absolutely,
in how you deal? So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no right or wrong way to do this business as long as you're doing things legal and ethically. I mean, that there's definitely rights and wrongs there. But I mean, as far as how you're going to run your business, there is no right or wrong. And you can come from any different perspective and you're going to appeal to a certain percentage of the population because you said or you didn't say something. And you know what? I'm not going to be the agent for everybody. And maybe this time Ben Smale gets it because he did promote pre-inspections. But I always talk about some agents will say this and this is why, and this is why I do it the way I do it. And ultimately it's up to you, whatever you want to do. And so at least I'm presenting it, but I'm not going to offer to pay for it. I'm not going to offer to make that part of what I do for them. Like I will help them coordinate it and they will pay for it if they want it.
If you don't, let me just tell Kathy the answer of how I do it, because that's what her question was. What do you do? I do a lot of pre-inspections. We already debated that. Often I get the pre-inspection back probably a day or two before the house goes on the market, so we don't have time to do anything. I do tell my sellers in advance, before we even have the pre-inspection, service your furnace and have a sticker and have them right on the side of the furnace. If it hasn't been serviced in the last furnace service, HVAC in the last 6 months, have it done. Make sure it's written on the side of the furnace. If I think the roof is shot or old or something, I might go proactively get estimates on having it repaired or replaced. So I'm a little proactive about some of those things. And if the house does sit and we do have time and the seller does want to make some repairs, I will tell them, go ahead and do what you want. And then I usually have the home inspector come back and update that report showing that those items are done. But to Dawn's point, it usually right now goes so fast, they just take it as is.
Thank you.
Can I ask another question?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So you had talked on, when you talked about like cracks that are concerning, things like that. This kind of goes along with Kathy's question. So I was showing a house last night and my buyer is not super astute when it comes to homes. So, he's like got his flashlight and he's like, okay, is this crack normal? Is that crack normal? Things like that. So I just kind of left it as, I'm your real estate agent. I'm not a home inspector. I'll never tell you one way or the other if you should or shouldn't get an inspection. That's not my job. But I don't know a better way to, like, it goes back to like Ben's, sorry, my dog's going to bark, so I need to mute quick, but just shh. So it goes back to Ben's, when he talked about in his buyer presentation, I'll be the one that'll look to see, if there's like a scary basement or things like that. Is there a resource or something that I could like verse myself in just so I know a little bit better about like the functions of home? Like, I'm sorry, I'm kind of on a tangent here, but like I have a sewer inspection happening today based on an inspection that we did this past week. And so, when this inspector was talking about the sewer thing, these sewer lines, it was kind of like a different language to me. So I'm at the inspection meeting, kind of, nodding my head and trying to appear like I know what he's talking about. Um, but I really didn't. So how do we just educate ourselves better in this to appear or to be more knowledgeable?
There's like a million books and YouTube videos out there if you want to watch about home ownership, home repairs, things that are normal, things that are not normal, but always, always, always be careful about saying whether something is normal or not. To Kristen's point, when she said, I see this a lot, this is common, this is something that I've had home inspectors say this before, but I am not a home inspector, so that is totally up to you. I'm not a foundation person. That's going to have to be a call that you make on your comfort level. And that's a lot of, you just have to go to a lot of inspections. And you know what, even if you don't have a lot of houses under contract, ask other agents if you can go to their inspections, ask the home inspector that you trust that you would use, oftentimes for your inspections, if maybe they would be willing to just go to some houses with you and talk you through things, or if you could shadow one of their inspections with that agent's permission and that buyer's permission. The more real world, like standing in a home inspection, meeting with a sewer line scope person, plumber, like just be there when they're doing those things and ask questions and be a sponge. Because there are things, even today I'll go on a home inspection and every once in a while the home inspector will say something. I'm like, well, shit, I didn't know that. I own tons of properties. I've been doing this for 20 years. I didn't know that. So I still learn things.
Thank you. Sorry, I was rambling. It's just this perception inspections are just overwhelming to me. So I just need to get a grip on it.
Yeah, and it's really hard, and you just have to be so careful. I say a lot of things I probably shouldn't say from a liability standpoint. And if somebody was along on my home inspections, a lot of times they'd probably tell me I should shut the hell up. But I feel like with the experience that I have, both as an investor and as a realtor, I do know how much things are going to cost most of the time. And I do have a better idea about what is serious and what isn't serious. And I probably say some things I shouldn't say. But I do always say, but I'm not a home inspector, but I'm not a foundation person. But in my experience, this is what I have seen.
Well, I think it's helpful too when you're an agent like yourself that does do investments and has flipped houses. So it's a lot easier to answer those questions when they're sucking their breath in and going, oh my God, this looks horrible. It's usually not as horrible as what the inspection sometimes looks like. And I find inspections a lot of times are, yeah, here's what we see, or we're not able to see it all. So now you have to get another professional in. And that tends to start scaring people. And I think you can use your knowledge like what Dawn has, and Laura, my wife, is really, she knows what a lot of this stuff costs. I think you can really be helpful in serving your clients when you actually do have experience to be able to at least give them, a little bit of relief from the worst case scenario. So you can give them, this range of, here's what it probably is. This would be like worst case, because sometimes the inspections go to worst case scenario. And so I think that's your job more than anything, is just keeping the calm.
Yeah, and even if you have okay, they want an electrician to look at it, so you have an electrician come out, just remember not all contractors' pricing is the same. So on that same house that I talked about, where it was the home inspector buying a house, his electrician came out and told him that repair was going to be $8,000 to $10,000. And I was like, what? Like, is he rewiring the whole house? Like, there is no way that is $8,000 to $10,000. Like, I have never seen that. And I knew what it was that needed to be done. I'm like, no, like, there's no way. So I had my electrician go over, and it was less than 3,000. It was actually going to be, probably, depending on if they wanted to do like everything, it was going to be like 2,900. But if they only did the things that he really felt were like a safety issue, he said he could do it for as little as $350.
Yeah, and that is, I think the scariest thing, when what Katie was alluding to, and Kathy probably too, but is like, oh my God, like they're going to run away now because it's so, this is so awful. And a lot of times awful is not as expensive as it looks. So
yeah, but don't always get a second opinion and figure out who the contractors are that you trust, because this guy is somebody that he knew and had done a bunch of work on his previous house. And so then he was like, well, shit, did I get screwed on everything I had him do on my other house? And I'm like, maybe. I don't know. But find out who the good contractors are. And the other realtors are a huge resource for that, because we all use these people all the time and know who the good ones are and who are reasonably priced. And
can I chime in there really quick? That, like what you just said, Dawn, number one, you guys, in my opinion, your job as a realtor is to help your clients find the information and answers that they need. Because I've had people ask me like, hey, does this scare you? And I'm like, if you saw what scares me, you would have a heart attack. Like I'm like Tim, we don't buy them. If you saw our house when we bought it, there's a lot of people out there that thought we were crazy, and we were, you couldn't even breathe in the house. And we're like, I love it. I can't breathe, but I love it. So your job is just to help them find the people that can get them the answers that they need, because they're the ones that are going to be living with it, paying for it, fixing it, or just dealing with it in general. And I think part of that is also having a good inspector. I had an inspector years ago that, I am not kidding, spent almost 45 minutes talking about grounded outlets in a living room. The outlet was not grounded, and it was a 3-prong outlet. It is not a big deal. It should have been a 2-minute conversation. He should have touched on it, explained it, and moved it on. He freaked my people out so bad, but they, took 2 days for them to call an electrician and get talked off the ledge. In the market we're in today, that would have killed the deal. Mm-hmm. So you have to have a good inspector, somebody that you trust. I highly recommend, I don't know who recommended it, but see if you can go on some inspection walkthroughs. And to be perfectly honest with you, try to be quiet. And I would suggest not asking a lot of questions. Let that time be for the person, the agent that's there with their clients, and just soak up the information, and then ask your questions to the agent after the fact. But it's a good way to see how different agents handle walkthroughs, how different inspectors go through the report. Dawn, I was impressed. Was that Home Standards that did your inspection?
That was actually Inspectix. That's Aaron Manelli. He used to be at Amerispac before.
I couldn't tell off the shirt. I kept trying to find the company. I've had a couple of inspectors through the years that will sit the people down at the table and go through the inspection report and then ask if there's any questions. I'm like, hey, how about we walk through the house? Mm-hmm. I'm a huge advocate. There's only a couple of inspectors in town that I would say absolutely no to, and that's a tricky talk later. But if you're not going to walk my people through the house and point out that this is not grounded, or here's the problem with the rafters, or here's where I saw the water coming in, it's no big deal. Pictures don't explain anything. Obviously, we're not getting into the attic and on the roof, but if we can show them the water heater was leaking and it wasn't leaking, and then he went back to it. If you can show that to them, a lot of times they can describe that to somebody like a dad or a brother or somebody that might have more knowledge and realize, oh, that's not a big deal. Or, you find out to replace a water heater is like $1,000, and it's not even an issue to them. But if they don't see that, so number one is just find a good inspector, or a couple of good inspectors that you really like and that are going to be good and explain. A lot of them will explain to you, oh, this probably costs like a couple $100 to fix. Most of them are pretty knowledgeable on what the real problem is and what the cost is going to be to fix it. Every now and then I'll have an inspector say, you know what, without knowing exactly what's causing that, I just can't even tell you, and then that's when, you have to either investigate it further, walk away, or, throw caution to the wind. So number one, just get them in front of the people that need to give them the answers that they need.
Yeah.
Dawn, can you speak to my dad's gonna come with me on the inspection?
Oh,
I actually start that at the very beginning. So when I do my buyer's appointment, one of the things in my booklet that I go over is don't ask too many people's opinions. And if you have somebody in your life that it is important to you, that they have input on your house, that you're going to have them show up at one house, you're going to have them come to a home inspection, we need to get them involved right now. Like right now, they need to get involved. So I need to know who that is. I need to have them with us almost every time we see a house. I need to educate them on the market just as I'm educating you on the market. Because if you bring them in at a home inspection, first of all, they're not a professional home inspector. They don't know what the hell they're talking about. I don't care who they are. Number two, they haven't bought a house in however long, 20 years, 30 years, maybe. They're going to come into your house and they're going to be like, you're paying how much for this piece of shit? And they're going to just totally burst your bubble and blow your deal. So I just get them involved and get them to buy in from the very beginning if that's something that's important. If they have told me no, that's not important to them, then their family is not coming to the inspection walkthrough. It's just no. Like that is your time with the inspector to answer questions, and having a bunch of family there is just a distraction. If they want to see the house, they can come at the end of the walkthrough and I'll get permission from the agent and the sellers to stay there a little bit longer and let them see the house.
I'll pipe in here, but I would say unless the dad's buying the house, don't bring him. Don't bring your Uncle Bob who knows everything and wants to play let's beat the home inspector because it'll take 5 hours. I literally was having him sign the agreement, which is the very first thing. Dad's already flipping through the report. Did you do this? Did you do that? I literally handed the dad the summary page and asked him if he wanted to do my job, and I'll show up at his work tomorrow and do his job. And the daughter and the agent just looked at me, and the daughter said, Dad, shut up and let him do his job. And it just gets to a point where it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, it is. And I've had people, even with that conversation up front, that family members show up. I mean, you can't, what are you going to do?
And then I joke that it's going to be a $50 extra fee for every person that's there that's not needed to be there.
Well, yeah, I would leave that up to the home inspector if they want to say that. But I would say
I wasn't.
Then you need to be quiet. Like this, the home inspector has a limited amount of time to get through all the information that he needs to get through, and so we don't have time for multiple people to be asking questions. Like this is a time for Jenny to ask questions because she's the one that's buying this house. But I try to nip that in the bud. The more you can do proactively at your initial buyer meeting and as you're looking at houses, and the more often you have these same conversations with them on the purpose of a home inspection and what this looks like, the better off you're going to be when you're actually in that situation. And you can't just say it one time because they forget that you said it one time. Like you need to have the conversation multiple times as you're looking at houses.
And I would also say back to price, $500 to $1,000 fixes a lot. Once you get a plumber or electrician on site, I'd always say just go ahead and bundle it. It's going to take them 2 hours. It's going to be $200-$300. It's not like me going to fix something. I can, but then I walk in Menards for the 5th time in the day and they're all like, oh, hi, Carl, what project are you working on today? Once they get there, it's fast. It's easy. Another thing, if you start scaring them, I mean, and they generally the first house they put an offer on is one they love. I've had clients, I've had 3 home inspections with them. That cost them $1,500. That would have been probably was $500 more than what it would have taken to make the repairs on the first house that they truly loved. So it's kind of a grain of salt. I just preface it. There's always going to be repairs. There's always going to be something. No house is perfect. I got stuff in my house that, of course, is not done correct yet. So I would just preface them on that, you know, this is the house you love. Let's go through it with an open mind, and everything's fixable. Everything is fixable for the most part.
Yeah. And I'd go back to, sorry, go ahead, Carl.
I was saying also, I'm going to freely admit, I did not watch all the video, but one thing I know that came up was for FHA homes, for what those appraisals are going to require as far as exposed wiring or a bunch of rotted wood. If the sellers, if you already know the sellers don't have any money to fix anything and you have an FHA home buyer and the house is a fixer upper, don't even have them put an offer in on it. I've heard so many times, oh, I didn't see that. I didn't think of that. And then the buyers don't have the most money. And then they look at their agent and then the agent goes, yeah, I'll pay for this home inspection. I should have seen that. So
yeah, I mean, that's important to know up front, like what the guidelines are for FHA and VA, and not show houses to your clients that can't meet those criteria. And that's something you can get from a lender. Usually they have a list of things that are common FHA or VA repairs, or talk to like a more experienced agent and they can kind of hit the highlights. But yeah, peeling paint, missing handrails, less than 3 years left on a roof, anything that's a major health or safety issue, those things are going to get called out. Peeling paint's the most common one. Exposed wiring's another big one, which exposed wiring sounds scary, but it's not scary. But it'll get called out on FHA or VA and somebody's going to have to fix it. If your buyer's willing to make some of those repairs, if they've got the time, energy, or money, depending on what that repair is, a lot of times that makes your offer more competitive if you write in there that your buyer's willing to make those appraisal repairs if anything comes up. But you'll get some experience and you should know which houses can even go FHA and VA. Because if I have an FHA buyer and I walk into one and I see a bunch of peeling paint, I'm like, nope, like, we're out. Like you're not going to be able to deal with this. And then I was going to say too, back to the home inspector, I think it's really, really important to find one who doesn't make things scary. So I don't know if those of you who watched the inspection walkthrough video, how many people actually watched it, but there was an issue in the house that we were at. It was an old house where they had used and I can't think of the proper word, you can probably think of it, Carl, but it's the tube plumbing as opposed to using the PVC or
Talk about PEX.
PEX, thank you. That's the word. So there are different codes depending on if you're in Douglas or Sarpy County, inside the city, outside of the city, what's allowed for PEX. It's very common now that people are using PEX, but technically, depending on where you are, it is not up to code. So that was a question that my buyers had when we looked at the house, because he was knowledgeable enough and had experience that knew that PEX wasn't allowed per code in some instances. And so some home inspectors would take that and say, yeah, this isn't up to code. They can't have PEX in here, and make a big deal about it. And then your buyer's like, well, shit, I'm going to have to redo all of this plumbing and freak out. Where Erin did a good job of saying, okay, it's a questionable area. Like, yes, some areas use it all the time. Some areas say, no, you can't use it. Some say you can use this kind, but you can't use this kind. In my experience, it's not normally an issue. But so he covered the fact that, yeah, maybe it's questionable, but he also covered the fact that if it was in his house, I mean, I think he even said, like, if this was in my house, I wouldn't change it. That a lot of people are using it. So, I mean, that's obviously your inspector's comfort level, what he's willing to say, especially on tape.
Can I chime in on that PEX really quick? Because this will kind of encompass other things. And then I've got to fly because I got to go show. But I had a situation a long time ago, and I'm going to give you the very short version. The inspector called out that it was PEX, and the main concern was it was not at that time code in Douglas County, which is funny because my sellers, the house they were buying in Kansas City was built completely with PEX. Mm-hmm. Long story short is the buyers were like literally beside themselves. They couldn't live with this house having PEX plumbing. So we had a couple of different plumbers come in to give bids to have it, have the copper put in. And this was up in the attic. The plumber that we had come in said it looks like it was done correctly. He said, the only problem I'm seeing is that it's not code. He goes, I do it all the time in Sarpy County, no big deal. While our plumber was there, they texted and said, hey, according to their plumber, it was going to cost like $2,500 to have this, from the basement all the way to the attic done, because you're going to be tearing out walls and ceilings and whatever. My people said, we're not doing that. My plumber said, take the $2,500 and run. He said his bill alone would probably be $2,500. So I don't know how they came up with their figure. So the short version is we gave them $2,500 towards closing costs, like what Dawn said in the earlier in the meeting. I talked to those sellers about 4 years afterwards because they asked me to come talk with them about selling their house. Guess what they didn't fix?
Yeah.
They didn't fix it. So, and I've got a couple other stories like that. So I always tell people there's a way to handle that. And if you can, put money in escrow to pay for stuff like that, to pay like the plumber directly to do it. Like to me, if you're that beside yourself that you just can't live with it, $2,500 is a lot of money for something that really wasn't a problem. Now that was a different market. Today's market, the seller would just put their foot down and say, no, I'm not fixing it. But so just keep that kind of stuff in the back of your mind when you're negotiating these things. Like if you can escrow the money and pay the contractor directly, that's, I don't know, maybe I just opened up a whole can of worms. I'm so sorry, because there are lenders that wouldn't let you do that without it being fixed. But anyway, just food for thought. The PEX is not that big of a deal, but
it depends on the inspector you have. There are inspectors, and I will not mention any names, who will make a big deal over things like that. I mean, I had a deal blow up because, I always recommend inspectors, but of course they can use anybody that they want. And they used a certain inspector that pretty much anybody with any experience could tell you is the one that we don't want anybody to use. And they were my buyers, and I just couldn't steer them
Deal
away.
killers?
I'm sorry, what?
The deal killers? The Deal Killers Inspection Company.
I know, that's why they should change their name too.
the inspector we don't talk about.
The one, it's like the Voldemort, like the one who shall remain nameless. Anyway, so this guy who shall remain nameless shows up at my home inspection, and we do the walkthrough, and he literally like made this huge deal about the grading between the houses. The swells between the houses were going to lead to water issues in the basement that didn't exist. Like there was no evidence of any moisture in the basement, of ever having had any issues. But it was gonna lead to issues. And this house was like 15 years old, no issues. The swales from a visual standpoint looked fine to me. I'm not a grading expert, but neither is he. And so he blew up my deal by saying that they were going to have huge water issues down the road. And the house had the drain tile system and a sump pump in it. Like there was no reason to make a big deal out of something that didn't exist. But he does. And, there are inspectors out there, even not him, other inspectors that I've had, walkthroughs with that will make big deals out of things that are not big deals. And once they've heard the inspector make a big deal about it, it's hard to walk that back and to rein them in. And so you need to know who you are recommending is going to present things in an educational way and make sure they're informing your clients, but not scaring them.
And so we've had several questions in the chat about, everybody wants to know who that inspector would be or what inspectors that would. We actually can't, like, you can't really say, but you can have conversations with people about ratings on, who they have enjoyed working with, who they've not enjoyed working with, whatever. But you can have one-on-one conversations with, and you can ask your mentors. But you don't want to get yourself in a lawsuit for antitrust or defamation of character or other things that agents have been sued for by different inspection companies. So
yeah, that's a one-on-one, face-to-face, not in writing, not on video conversation.
You frisk the person that you're talking to before you talk to them. Make sure hidden microphones and
well, and you have to be careful though, because that home inspector that I'm not saying their name, they have agents who love them. I mean, I have had buyer's agents write offers on my listing, and that is who they chose. And I have said to them in the most tactfully way, is this a home inspector that you've worked with before, or is this someone that your buyer has chosen? And they're like, no, this is my regular home inspector. I love him. And I'm like, are you kidding me? But as the seller's agent, you have to walk that very fine line in dictating who a buyer can use and cannot use.
Hey, Dawn, in a purchase agreement, can somebody eliminate, or in a listing agreement, in a counter, can they say who they won't accept as inspectors? Is that legal?
You can.
I'm asking you to speak to it.
Yeah, no, you can say that you want, the seller has final approval over who the home inspection company is. You can say that the buyer has to identify the home inspection company up front. You can say things like that. I think you still would have to be very careful about putting in a counter, you can use anybody but this person, because a seller would not necessarily have that knowledge to know that that is not a good company. So they would know that was coming from you. The only way it would ever get back to, but I did hear of one instance of the person getting sued because they told the buyer and the buyer told the inspector, well, my agent said that this was in the counter, that we couldn't use you, or the agent on the other side said we couldn't use you. So I mean, you're still opening yourself up for liability, but there's ways to get around that by saying that we get to pick, you give us 3, or you tell us who and we have to approve it. And honestly, now that we're forcing people to use some kind of additional inspection addendum, it probably wouldn't be a bad idea if we put on there that they have to identify the inspection company. Back in the old days, we actually had a blank, just like you do for termite, where you would identify your inspection company in your offer. And we don't have that anymore. And I wish that we did. At least, for lender we identify, for termite we identify. Why don't we identify for home inspection? And that's definitely something maybe we could talk to Tom about adding a blank.
Yeah, I would love to see that. I think that would be, because, I'm not ashamed of who we use in home inspections. And I think that the only people that would be against that maybe would be ones who have some questionable kinds of inspectors that their concern won't get approved. So
yeah, and it would require an extra conversation with your buyer up front, because your buyer would have to identify their home inspection company before making an offer, where now I think a lot of us, you make the offer and then you give them a couple names and say who you like and who you don't like, and then they pick.
We're actually putting the inspection, if we're having inspection, but we're actually, the last one we did, we had a major defects only over $1,000 kind of inspection. And we identified who the inspection company was, who the inspector was, and we had already made the appointment even before we got the accepted offer.
Yeah, and that goes a long way. So when you're negotiating with an agent on the other side and you want to make your offer more appealing, the more things that you can set up front, and
right in the offer.
Yeah, the tighter you make it all, the better your offer is. Kristen,
which would like 2 days later, 3 days later for the inspection, which that was also that was a good point.
Yeah. So that kind of comes back to your home inspection company too. If you have somebody that you use, you want it to be somebody that is very responsive. Like if I text you and say, hey, what do you have open? Because I'm writing an offer, like I need you to respond to me. If it's something you have to wait till the next day when the office is open and you're writing that offer at 7 o'clock at night, that could be an issue too. So you want to make sure that you've got somebody that, is responsive, that can get in there quickly, which when the market has more houses on it, sometimes that can be a challenge because, in a hot spring market, where there's a lot of transactions, it could be a real problem to get a home inspector in 3 days. Like sometimes it takes the full 7 or 10 business days to physically get somebody in the house, just because they're all so busy right now, because it's still kind of the build up to the market and there's nothing to sell. So there's fewer home inspections going on and fewer people are having home inspections because the market's so hot. It's easier to get in quicker, but you have to keep that in mind. You won't always be able to do it in 3 days.
Yeah. But while you can
absolutely
write it, so
do it as fast as you can.
Okay, well we're about at we actually are at 1:02. So I know you guys probably have 1,000 more questions, and we can do a part 2 to this at some point. So thank you very much, and Dawn, really appreciate it, and appreciate all of you mentors who have joined us and added to this conversation, because that's what makes it. So any last questions or comments that you guys have before we go? Okay, well, have a
That's great. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
bye. Thanks. Have a great week, you guys.